Hi, everyone. You're listening to the NYC Taxi News Podcast. I'm Abe, and I'm here today with Carolyn and Dawood. As usual, there's a lot happening. So, Carolyn, why don't you take it away?
Hey, Abe, how you doing? Okay, you didn't do the homework, or did you? We'll get started with just a little rundown of what's been happening since our last podcast. The Taxi Workers Alliance lawsuit against the TLC regarding the issuance of unlimited EVs and waves is still ongoing. The IDG, Independent Drivers Guild, known as the pseudo-union, funded by Uber, filed an amicus brief in support of the TLC. I guess no surprise there. Uber has mounted a lawsuit against the insurance company, American Transit. Maybe we'll get into that in a little bit. The congestion tolling lawsuits and hearings continue. And our very own Mira Zoshi, deputy mayor, is metastasizing. In addition to being deputy mayor, she's been appointed by Mayor Adams to the MTA board. And she has another job. She's now in charge of overseeing the delivery apps. What could go wrong? There's a couple of hearings coming up that are relevant to our industry. And I should mention that the Medallion Relief Program closings should be completed by April 30th, as per TLC. But first, I'd like to remind our listeners that February 5th marked 6 years since Douglas Shifter, TLC driver, killed himself in front of City Hall. He warned of the looming disaster of the oversupply of vehicles due to the negligence and malfeasance of those misguided electeds and bureaucrats in power, who are still in power, by the way, just slightly different versions. Doug tried to alert us as to what was coming through his many articles in Black Car News. Rest in peace, Doug. And as we know, there's still a tremendous oversupply of vehicles. The latest on the Taxi Workers Alliance versus TLC lawsuit was Taxi Workers Alliance's lawyer, Zubin Soleimani's letter to the judge regarding the amicus brief filed by the Independent Drivers Guild. And he notes, I'll just read this briefly, an increase. There's still a lot of vehicles on the road and not any more demand is basically what they're saying. So TLC, why do you want to add more cars? And I looked up the number of cars on the road this morning, and it's about 109,000 for hire vehicles and about 9,000 taxis. So, yeah, rounding off, we're at 120 vehicles. There just is not enough demand to support that many vehicles. But, you know, we've been saying that for 8 years, and nobody ever listens, and then they just keep adding more cars. So, Dawood, any thoughts on that?
On the vehicle, that was a great introduction, by the way. On the vehicle supply versus the demand and the lawsuit. Yeah. I mean, you guys have been going at this longer than I have, but in terms of, it's funny. I've come from a totally different angle. You guys have come from the taxi medallion industry, but we both reached the same conclusion separately. And it's just incredible to me. I think there's a few things going on to kind of hit this topic. Is then when someone makes policies and then even in their heart of hearts they know it's wrong, it's always, it's very hard for them to say, you know what, guys, listen, I was wrong and I shouldn't have done this and I miscalculated. I mean, the chair, David Doe, which, by the way, we should also mention that his term has expired, but according to the city charter, I guess he's still allowed to do it. I think he was quoted in his commissioner's corner saying that there shouldn't be a lot of EVs added because, it's still early, so why would that happen? And of course, that's exactly what happened. It's like a bad stock market analyst. And when you have a bad stock market analyst in a hedge fund, you fire them. There's no excuses. And so with David Doe, I've called for his resignation. Now you can't even call for his resignation. I just called for the city charter to be enforced at this time. And so I think the thing is that we have to hit harder. We have to go stronger. And I think whether, this failing up by this administration, and listen, there's some good things they do. There's some bad things they do. But honestly, enough of the nonsense. and everything's in the data. I mean, the utilization rates for Uber and Lyft are falling and plateauing. This is all data-driven. This is not personal animus. And so if David Doe, Mira Joshi, Eric Adams, he has other stuff to deal with as well with the illegal immigration crisis, which, to be fair to him, is not totally his fault. It's something that he was dealt. So I don't want to be unfair, but these people cannot get away with this, and this is what the media is for. So, anyways, that was my very strong introduction to my opinion about what's going on.
I think you're beginning to understand.
Hold on. Just one thing. Hold on, Carolyn. For everybody that doesn't understand, tell everyone what the utilization rate is and what it means.
I think the utilization rate, and Carolyn, you can add to this, the way I simplify, just because there's this complicated format, is basically how busy an Uber or Lyft driver or a high volume service provider, which there's only Uber and Lyft in New York City, basically bases that do more than 10,000 trips a day, are kept. So basically when someone logs into the app, I'm simplifying this because there's this whole formula, they need to be on the job or going to a job more than 53% of the time. That's a floor. And so in the TLC minimum pay calculation, if the utilization rate, if they're not kept busy, if it drops below 53%, then they got to come out of pocket to reimburse the drivers to make the minimum pay. So as it relates to what Abe is saying, every month, with a 2-3 month delay, the TLC publishes this, and this utilization rate is edging closer and closer to 53%, which implies two things, basically. One, Uber and Lyft are not taking on new drivers. This can be seen because the wait lists are increasing. And if it gets even lower, currently active Uber and Lyft NYC drivers potentially can get, quote unquote, locked out, meaning they have to schedule when they want to work, which is totally the antithesis of why drivers do Uber and Lyft. Caroline, I don't know if you want to add to how I just described that.
Well, it's funny. There's a very perverse incentive in this because as an Uber driver, the rate of pay that you're going to get on a trip is going to go down as you're working harder and doing more trips. I mean, there's something very weird about that. And also, nobody ever mentions, what about all those hours that those cars are out there driving around, perhaps with the app turned off because they've been told to turn the app off, they've been locked out, or they're relocating themselves to another zone, or they're waiting, for the jobs to come back, so they're still out there. I mean, the car doesn't disappear into the fourth dimension, and creating more congestion, et cetera.
That's a great point. What you just said is to the point of congestion. Exactly.
Yeah, but what will happen is Uber will just blame the city. They'll say, oh, it's the city's fault because they have all these stupid regulations, and that's why we're forced to lock drivers out of the system. But the basic problem is always still there. It's too many cars. It's too many drivers. I think there's about 175,000 drivers who are licensed to drive any sort of for-hire vehicle or taxi. It used to be 160-something. It doesn't mean, they're not all out there on a daily basis. But so what does the TLC do? They want to have unlimited numbers of EVs and FHVs, and, they keep trying all kinds of different things. This really shouldn't be left up to a court. I don't think a court is really qualified to make these kind of decisions. That should have been made by the legislature, the executive branch, the TLC, not a court. But, that's what happens in all these cases because, the legislators just, don't want to deal with it, I guess. So they.
Well, I've been reading the court documents, Carolyn, and I know you have been too. This is my interpretation of what's going on with the New York State Supreme Court case. Is as I read the transcripts, I think with the judge, which she's obviously she's a very sophisticated mind. I can see that in the transcript. What the base argument is that is the TLC allowed? What the judge is basically saying is that okay. What NYCHO is saying is the TLC allowed to do this? Do they have the mandate to do this? And so what the TWA is saying is that they don't have the mandate to do an unlimited exemption.
Right.
And the judge is saying that, yeah, that's actually a good point. Either you say, okay, we do X amount, or this is the deadline. If you do neither, then it's like an oversaturation can occur, and then you issue the report, which is totally like a circular way to do this. I think what basically happened, if we're getting to the nuts and bolts, if we're just getting to the first principles of the thing, I just looked this up. Revel was one of the leading lobbyists in 2021 in the city. Mm-hmm. And I think it's quite obvious that this is one of the few instances where there's so many parties that don't want more plates. The yellow cab industry doesn't want more plates. Many people in the black car industry don't want more plates, or they want specific black car-based exemptions just for their base plates. This electric vehicle thing really only benefits Revel, and I predict an article, I think Revel will actually shut down their rideshare business and just go to the infrastructure business, and this is how that helps. Basically, by adding all these EVs, now all of their EV charging stations are fully occupied by other people's cars. So I think the nutty thing about why we're speaking logically, we're looking at the data, we're saying, okay, supply, demand, utilization rates, we're being very logical about this. And as you've mentioned, Carolyn, I think what's basically happening is politics. It's like, I want an answer and let's solve backwards. So this is why I focus a lot of content on the quote unquote predatory leasing industry. I think the TLC said, okay, who are we going to put this on to justify this, right? We're going, oh yeah, these rental companies are predatory. Now it happens that I know a lot of math and I know a lot of finance and I know a lot about that industry. The margins are 5 to 10%. Like, it's absolutely insane to call that predatory, and we've laid it out. And so now TLC Doe is not using that term anymore. So I think as we talk about this, it's very simple. Like everyone has always said, there's 120,000 cars. And by the way, there's 3,500, over 4,000 inactive taxi medallions. This is absolutely insane. You have 4,000 inactive yellow cabs and you're adding more cars. Like, just on a baseline, like, that doesn't make any sense.
Oh, you know what? There's one more lawsuit. There's one more lawsuit I forgot to mention. The lawsuit that Taxis for All and some other disability groups are suing the TLC because they're saying the TLC didn't meet its mandate to have 50% of yellow taxis wheelchair accessible. I think that was supposed to have happened by 2023.
What is the TLC doing right? What is the TLC doing right under this commissioner? It seems like everybody hates them. Everybody's suing them. This guy doesn't know what he's doing. And I think I'm personally losing my patience for him. And drivers are losing their patience. That's the funny thing about
bureaucracies. It doesn't matter whether they work or not. They just keep going. They have a life of their own. And they have the same people that go back and forth between industry and consulting groups and lobbyists and regulatory agencies. And, there they are. I keep seeing the same names and the same faces. The whole Adams administration is infiltrated with ex-TLC people. They're at the MTA also. We're going to have Mira Zoshi at the MTA, and Midori Valdivia has been at MTA for a while. She used to work for Mira at TLC. So it's the same people. In the same,
well, we got an election. We got an election coming up in 2025, and I think there needs to be a bit of fear of losing an election put into these people. That, although a lot of local media is dead, that's another issue, is that no one reports on these people and goes into the details. So, for example, TLC, and let's just be on the record, his term is expired. Right. It's expired. What the hell is going on?
Well, for years they didn't fill all of the commissioner positions either. Okay. Also, for 2 years they allowed Uber to operate without a license. So So
then we have to go hard. We have to go. In my opinion, it's like what Einstein said: if you do the same thing, expect a different result. It's the definition of insanity. So and we've said this multiple times. We said this when we had that podcast about and the next day Nitrous made a lawsuit, right? Is that if they don't want to deal reasonably and they want to start defaming people and saying this guy's predatory and the wheelchair promise we made, oh yeah, we don't need to make that. No, you're going to be taken to court. You're going to get sued. And by the way, we're going to dig into the city charter. Go. Your term is up. What the hell is going on? Like, when are you getting renominated? When's the process? Why aren't you publishing the OFS reports? This all has to be called out. They had an opportunity we could have been much more diplomatic about this, which we were initially. Now the gloves are off. Now we got to come at them extremely hard.
Well, you have a chance to say all this if you want to on March 14th. The City Council is having the Budget and Oversight hearing for MTA, DOT, TLC, and the Department of Design and Construction. So presumably at that March 14th hearing, Doe or somebody else from the TLC is going to get up there and read a statement on what the TLC has been doing and, have they complied with this law or that law or the other law. I mean, somebody should be asking them, and there is public testimony, I believe, at that hearing. There usually is. So
but the last time I checked, it's not only me, it's not like, I'm not, William Randolph Hearst here where I have that much influence where I say something and like the Spanish-American War starts. But what I'm saying is that I think people aren't riled up enough about this. I think in this country, in this city, people are like, shrug your shoulder. This is how it is. Imagine all the people who, through the centuries, have built this city. Do you know what I'm saying? Gone to all of this stuff that happened for these bureaucrats and these politicians. Now, I'm not saying I'm not being unreasonable. There's some things that are very complicated and, require, you can't always be like, well, he's an idiot and they're an idiot, and that's unreasonable. What we're talking about is the NYC TLC industry, right? 2 years ago, the TLC revoked Rebel's ability to add the EV exemption within 5 days, right?
Yeah.
They acted. Within 5 days, they acted because they could see the writing on the wall in 5 days.
Yeah, and look what happened to that commissioner. That was Aloy C. Heredia Jarmuschuk. She was out right after that.
Well,
there was a reason why she was out, but
Well, I've interacted with her. She had, honestly, she's a very nice person, but she went through, in my personal interactions, I mean, I remember I spoke to her a few times, and sometimes she was complimentary, and at other times she would be like, why are you CCing the TLC? It's like, what? What's going on? I'm just talking about, so I think these people don't think that anybody's going to call them out. And I think with an effective media, they will be called out, and let's start enforcing the laws that they made. And by the way, their answer to bureaucracy is more bureaucracy, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Let's create another office. Let's create another office. Let's create other employees, right? How much a percentage of New York City GDP is government at this point? It's crazy. It's absolutely nuts. And so we have to go harder. We have to call it out. And, for example, they can also throw lawsuits at media companies and all of this type of stuff, right? There are ways to defend against it. For example, I'll tell you a real life story. I used a generic photo of a taxi medallion. Generic. On October 18th, I got a lawsuit saying this is a copyright violation.
Wow.
From an article a year and a half ago. Now, what these idiots don't know is I know a lot of intellectual property lawyers, and I've effectively defeated the lawsuit. So
who brought
people
say against you?
Mystery people. Let's say, well, not the city because that's not their copyright, right? But this is how these people.
Wait. Whose copyright is you mean the shape and size and color of the medallion, the image?
A picture of a taxi medallion. A picture of a taxi
without
medallion.
a particular number.
With a number that it wasn't even their taxi medallion. But the way that probably works
because there it is. It's out in public. Anybody can see it as the cab rolls by on any given day. Anybody could snap a picture. So how is that? I don't understand how.
Well, they're in copyright. Without getting too much in detail, in copyright, someone can say, well, for example, if you take a picture of the Statue of Liberty and the sunlight's hitting it in a certain angle or something like that, right? You can copyright that photo potentially, right? This, where I'm saying where the mystery behind this is that photo was a year old when I just started the publication, and it was generic. It was like a medallion on the hood of a yellow cab, you know? And
I think somebody is letting you know about.
Well, somebody's letting me know, but I'm letting them know that I also have resources. And the thing is that they have declared war. And if they want a war, they're going to get a war. And so that's why I'm very, now the gloves are off. If they want a war, they will get a war. And I think it's on platforms like us, like AutoMarketplace, like NYC Taxi, like Black Car News, right? We have to call them out and we have to go hard at them.
Well, yeah, no
excuse,
no
apology.
And the Post and the city and all this Gothamist, whatever it is, they don't go after them hard. They don't. Even when people get in touch with them and give them all kinds of inside juicy stuff, they never run with it. And that includes the New York Times, too, for sure, and Brian Rosenthal, who, got that whole story.
So my thing is, if we don't want free press in this country, let's call it a day. Let's just call it a day, right? All the people who died, all the people, who were in prison. Yeah. So the point of the free press.
You're going in and out. What's going on? Oh, you're being censored.
Are you talking to me? Hold on a minute. Dawood, how were you served with any, about, the medallion,
It's what they call patent trolls. The thing is, I know a lot about that industry because I know a lot of people in intellectual, a lot of friends and family are intellectual property lawyers. They wanted they tried to scare me, number one. They wanted $30,000. They're going to get less than $1,000, and we're going to settle it out. But the point is that lawsuit came on October 18th, the day they announced this whole thing.
Yeah. Interesting. So maybe it's
what was in that?
Maybe it's a troll, but it's a pretend troll. But the troll is actually working for somebody else.
And then I'm trying to be a conspiracy theorist, but that's a little too much. Where there's smoke, there's fire. What I'm basically saying is that, and I've had people who subscribe to the newsletter my thing is that this daily news, Evan Simko Bednarski. Number one, the Daily News is owned by a hedge fund, and they're all going to get fired. So if Evan's listening to this, he's not going to have a job in a year. And if he's not going to have a job in the year, why? Because number one, everything is behind a paywall, right? Everything is behind a paywall. All of these, whether it's the Daily News or the New York Post or whoever it is, right? Or the New York Times, these media companies have clout. So for example, with the New York Times, right? When is the last time outside of Brian Rosenthal, and by the way, this reporting is after the fact reporting. What we need more of is, before, something happens reporting, right? If you're reporting on disaster after it happened, it's okay, that needs to happen, but we need reports on, okay, wow, something is brewing. It's almost like before the subprime housing crisis happens, you need people to warn that, hey guys, this housing market's looking a little off, we should do something. Or with the medallion crisis, there were some people who, before it was happening, were warning about it, but it was going ignored. And so my thing with the media is that I think the way these bureaucrats and these politicians act is I don't think they think they're answerable anymore. I think their mentality is, well, we can buy media, we can lobby media, we can influence media, right? Why do you think platforms like Twitter, or X, I should say, or other platforms are taking off? Because people are losing trust in the mainstream media. And people are reasonable. I'm not saying let's start getting to conspiracy theory. I'm talking about, why is little old me talking about the TLC chair's term expiring? Why isn't the Daily News covering that? Why isn't the New York Times covering that? For the OFS report, right? And by the way, these are non-conspiratorial topics, right? Oh yeah, that's right. There was during this whole tax medallion crisis, there's Office of Financial Stability was created, right? It's like, okay, is no one gonna follow up on that? Like, what's going on? It was because of these platforms like NYC Taxi News, AutoMarket, Black Card News. We're mentioning this, and okay, all of a sudden they can publish a report a year and a half late. Has Evan Simko Bednarski once reported on that? He's supposed to cover this industry.
Yeah, I think that's the most important thing in the whole story, that supposedly the report was done in February, and it wasn't released until October 18th, the day they decided to unleash unlimited numbers of for-hire vehicles on the road.
No,
I mean,
what you're talking about
is
that's the FHV license review. And then there was the Office of Financial Stability reports on the medallions. So what I'm saying is that, you know, there's a time for diplomacy. We don't want to get into shouting matches with everybody, right? But at the same time, if you don't, and we've said, I've been pretty consistent with this, we've all been consistent with this, and I've seen this in other countries.
Right.
And other people's ancestors have seen this in other countries. That's why they came to America. If you don't speak up, they will act, whether intentionally or unintentionally or consciously or subconsciously, they will act corrupt, and they don't think they're answerable. So for example, Meera Joshi, Deputy Mayor Meera Joshi, what has she done to have earned a board seat on the MTA? If you canvass the yellow cab industry, she would probably get an F. Is that a fair statement?
They probably wouldn't give you an opinion at this moment because they're hoping and praying that she'll have some influence over the board so that yellow taxis will be exempt from any further congestion charges. That's what I think people are hoping. And that's what always happens in these situations. You have somebody who has some power or influence or is representing those who actually have the power and the influence. She's a handmaiden. She's a member of the managerial elite. And they dangle something in front of the victims and say, well, maybe we'll stop some of this torture partially, but you better just keep your mouth shut and not say anything. And let me tell you something. If you went down to the city council hearing, I'll tell you what will happen. You will sit there for 6 hours with nothing to eat or drink, you know, just glued to your chair, and then maybe they'll let you speak at the very end, and it won't be 3 minutes, it'll be 2 minutes. And if you say, you know, and then you'll just go away, and they'll just close the books on it. That's what always happens at hearings when they have people who have anything interesting or intelligent or challenging to say. They're always relegated to the end of the hearing, and that's why people don't even bother testifying at these hearings anymore. They're show hearings. They're meaningless.
Well, I think
let me jump in. Josh Gold publicly made a statement a couple of days ago that if the yellow taxis are exempt from the congestion surcharge, that it will hurt his Ubers because it'll take jobs away from them. Okay. I have never heard, well, I wouldn't say never, but I cannot believe this statement made by this gentleman, Mr. Gold, okay, that, you know, this Uber who jumped into our bed in 2014 or 2012 or whatever it was, okay, and stole all the work from the yellow taxis by undercutting our rates and whatever they had to do to get the people away from us. And now all of a sudden he's worried about his drivers losing money if the yellow taxis are exempt. I mean, what is going on here? I mean, it's a matter of who gains other than the yellow taxis, um, uh, by taking the surcharge away, which was we're in favor of. Okay, who else can gain from that?
Well, I think what Josh Gold, and I've spoken to Josh Gold offline, I think what he's actually, I'll give Josh Gold this much credit. He's very just, his belief is like, he's not trying to hide what his belief is. He just doesn't think like effectively a taxi medallion system should exist. Like that's what his belief is. And so like, like he's not like being mysterious about it. Like that's just like, he's like, why does a taxi medallion exist? I think Abe, what he's arguing is that, okay, if the yellow cabs are exempt from congestion fees, oh crap, from an Uber perspective, then yellow cabs have a structure, like they're structurally cheaper. Meaning, like just on a tax basis, because yellow cabs don't pay sales tax, they don't have a black car fund fee, then they don't have this additional surcharge, for congestion tolling, like on top of the current one, right? I just always feel like it's important to say like this is an additional congestion surcharge because there's currently one that exists. So what he's afraid of is like, oh man, all these yellow cabs are not on our app. And if all of them are 20 or 25% cheaper, people are going to find out about that. People are like, oh yeah, the yellow cab is like 20 or 25% cheaper in Manhattan, and so we're going to start taking yellow cabs. That is why in the background, Uber was trying to sign up yellow cab. So when someone calls Uber X on their app, they could get a yellow cab. So what he's fighting for, see, at the end of the day, like if Josh Gold works for Uber, he will fight for Uber, just like a medallion owner will fight for the medallion. What he is doing is logical. He's basically saying this is unfair to Uber. Now, unfair is an interesting term because, I mean, that's like an opinionated term. It's less about unfair. It's like this will keep Uber at a disadvantage because if yellow cabs can structurally meaning like $10 base fare, $20 base fare, $20 base fare, but then they don't pay a sales tax, they don't have an additional congestion fee. It's just the passenger just paying less in a yellow cab, and there's no way to compete against it for a TLC, for a non-medallion cab. So he's afraid that that's going to happen, as is a lot of other people in the black car industry. That's why you see publication like Ira Goldstein in the Black Car News say, well, all FHVs should be treated the same. He has the same worry because if black car volumes go down, the percentage fee of the black car, I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but that's their incentive. And that's what they're fearing, that this will keep their industry as a disadvantage. Just like a yellow cab medallion owner would be fearful that if they made the congestion surcharge equivalent to the FHVs, right? Because right now on the current proposal, the medallion surcharge is $1.25 and the black car is $2.50, right? So
the traditional black cars as of now, and this could change moment to moment, we're only going to be $1.25. The liveries,
yes, but
I actually don't think the liveries are paying any congestion fees, but I'm not.
But
really
in terms of Uber and Lyft, you're right. That's a good call out.
In terms traditional black cars
Lyft,
would to be differentiated. Like the thing that bothers me with the inconsistency of Josh Gold's logic is when he wants yellow and the rest of the services to be the same. Oh, they're similarly situated. But when they don't want them to be the same, then we're not similarly situated. In every court, in every case that's come up in the last 10 years, it's been determined that yellow cabs are not similarly situated. They're not equivalent. They're not the same. And there's no reason why everything should be, even, Steven, across the board, and everything should be the same, because we're not similarly situated. I mean, what the city should have done is made very clear what the differentiation was 10 years ago, and just gone forth with that and given yellow taxis advantages, like being able to use the bus lanes, having more hack stands and relief stands just for yellow taxis, and it would have been clear that this was the city franchise. And then I don't think there would have been so much objection to the accessibility requirement.
I think you're getting to the heart of the situation, and I think this is where everything gets back to the debt restructuring that happened and the city loan guarantee. I think during that time, it's like, okay, is the medallion system reached its expiration date? Is this something we want, or is it not? So, okay, you litigate that, you decide that, you have to, people are going to sue you related to that, who bought the medallion on implied things, all of that happens. But regardless, what happened was they said, we basically, by guaranteeing the taxi medallion loans, by, doing all of this stuff, and there's all the reasons we need a yellow cab, for street hailing and everything like that in New York City, that this medallion system should exist. Because the crazy thing about working through this is like, there's a very funny Family Guy episode where like people are like, you know what, why do we need a government? It's all this bureaucracy. So they dissolve the government and everybody's like, it's like an anarchy. And then over 2 years, like a government builds up again. It's like, what? They're like, hey, I got an idea. Instead of canvassing everybody, why don't we just assign someone to to vote on our behalf? So you know what I'm saying? What I'm saying, the crazy thing about today's day and age, as time passes, it's 90 years on from when the medallion was created, 86 years on. I think people forgot the fundamentals of, oh, wait, time out. Instead of saying, why does the medallion exist? And it's like, well, why was it created? Wasn't like it's not a naturally occurring thing. It's on air. And so
because left to their own devices, 100,000 drivers will apply for new licenses and new cars. That's what happens. And it just happened again when they were going to open up the licensing. I think 100,000 guys lined up to apply for licenses.
And so
that's pretty clear that it does need to be, you need to limit the numbers.
And so this is why in some of my articles I say TLC 101. It's like LaGuardia has to come out of his grave. And like if LaGuardia came out of his grave and he saw what was going on, he's like, I thought I addressed this, already. Like, that's funny that this is still being debated. And so it's complex and it's simple. Like the simple part about it is like everybody can understand supply and demand. It's like, yeah.
It's the same problem with the deliveristas. For a long time, I've thought that most of the supposed bike trips out there are done by deliveristas, and lo and behold, they are. I think TLC DOT came out with numbers, estimates of daily cycling activity by year. They had it through 2022. It was 61,000 bike commuters to work, and that's 122,000 trips. That makes sense. But this was 610,000 daily trips, so that means there's 500,000 deliverista trips, and just a handful of people who are actually riding bicycles to work or city bike. That's all there is.
I think that's a perfect example is the city bike thing, right? So the city, well, another example is like, I always use the example of like Central Park horses, right? Imagine like if that wasn't regulated, like anybody could just bring their horse from Connecticut and just start riding it in Central Park. It's like, obviously that would be chaotic on multiple levels, right? And so it's like where a simple thing gets convoluted is when you're trying to achieve other things. So as it relates to the Green Rides Initiative, I think the goal of the Green Rides Initiative and the politics of it is they want to electrify New York City's for-hire vehicle fleet because they don't want to fall behind other cities. And also there's good elements of that. So I think instead of having a mature conversation about like, how can we do this? Because by the way, Mayor Bloomberg also wanted to electrify 1/3 of the yellow cab fleet in 2012. So it's not like a brand new idea that no one ever thought of before. I think they have to have this non-partisan discussion that's very technical. We almost need technocrats now rather than bureaucrats, right? Where the technocrat says, okay, the ratio we need is, for every car one charger can support 20 cars. So therefore, the algorithmic policy is that you cannot add X amount of EVs unless you have Y amount of chargers, right? Now their argument will be like, if you force a driver to buy $50,000 EVs, they'll build the chargers. But then the charge build has 1 or 2 year lag. So what is the guy supposed to do in the next 1 or 2 years? How is he supposed to figure out, how to charge his car? We're reviewing EVs right now, by the way, for AutoMarketplace. And one driver, for example, is a real life example, very nice guy, longtime black car driver, traditional black car driver, who works for Uber now. He bought a $80,000 EV. He has a $1,500 a month car payment. For full coverage, he's paying about $1,000 a month in insurance because insurance is very expensive for EVs, especially full coverage. And he tells me privately, he's like, I shouldn't have done this. This is like 1 month after the purchase. He's telling me like, I don't know why I did this. I fell for the hysteria. So, this whole thing about like why I'm so animated about going at this is that in our arguments throughout all of these, you guys have been doing this 8-9 years and like banging your head against the wall. We spoke about Doug Shifter, rest in peace. We're celebrating, 6 years this February, right?
Yeah.
I think the very serious and sad thing about those things is that Doug Shifter wasn't some like lunatic he was a reasonable man who was writing about it, who was passionate. And unfortunately, like it's kind of like in the Vietnam War or whatever, where some people get to a point where like they feel like they have such a strong belief in something that they're willing to demonstrate that in different ways. Now, obviously, it's basically what I guess without commenting too much on whether that's right or wrong, what I'm saying is that Doug Shifter, think about the mentality, an intelligent guy who is obviously, he's writing about the industry. He's not some, nutcase over here. He drove in front of City Hall and he did what he did there. And he wanted to make a statement. Because of him, in his memory, that's when the wheels started turning. And by the way, there were other suicides, right? So what I don't understand, and by the way, the only reason the taxi medallion debt restructuring happened is because they went on a hunger strike, right? If you remember at that time, they were chasing de Blasio in Central Park, right? So, for example, it's interesting for me to say, like I would say I'm more like a capitalist, you could say, right? But I'm not like, obviously think there should be a social welfare system and stuff like that. But I kind of respect this because they're saying, you know what, if you don't want to listen to us, if you don't want to hear us, if you want to ignore us, right, we're not going to go away. We're going to be in front of City Hall every day. We're going to be on a hunger strike.
Unfortunately, the hunger strike and that way of looking at the whole situation bolstered the city's false narrative that the problem was caused by excessive borrowing by stupid people who didn't know what they were doing or understand what they were signing, and now we're going to fix it with these half-assed measures. When what they should have done was put policies in place that brought the medallion up to, say, a $500,000 value, instead of just trying to subsidize a couple of thousand. I think it's 1,800, 1,900, maybe it's 2,000 people. There's a whole rest of the industry besides the people who had big loans. So I'm against the MRP, but, because I think they should have fixed their policies, the underlying stupid policies, but they didn't do that. So,
I think you're absolutely right. I think how I would frame it, instead of solving for a medallion price, I think they just have to reflect that, okay, there's an asset that's worth $1 million. Now, whether that's a bubble, not a bubble, the market will determine that. But by the way, also the other complexity of this is the city sold the medallions to raise money for their budget. So that's yet another complexity. So they were incentivized to inflate the medallion price to raise more money for the budget. But just on a pure logic basis, it's like, okay, something is worth $1 million and 3 years later it's worth 150,000. Okay, is that just a debt bubble? Can explain that? Like, there's probably more to it if the price is dropping 85%. No. Exactly. And so for example, I think, so as it relates to now and the current administration and the TLC chair and Deputy Mayor Joshi, and it's important to say these names out loud, is that, listen, we're not trying to destroy anybody's career. We are all living in the city. Someone has to be in politician, someone has to be bureaucrat. Just because someone is a bureaucrat doesn't make them an idiot. I'm not saying that. But what infuriates people is when they think their voice is completely and utterly ignored, when they think they're making very reasonable statements. They're not being addressed. So, I would like to see them go at the disabled community. How are they going to demonize them? I want to see this. I want to grab my popcorn and understand how they're going to demonize the disabled community. I
don't think so. They won't demonize them. They'll just bring up statistics, which we know there's no demand for wheelchair accessible taxis. No, I'm exaggerating. There's 100 people a day who are actually using accessible dispatch. I know that because I guess there's 200 trips a day, and I assume it's probably the same person going back.
But I'm saying that is a very legitimate discussion. But I'm saying just in terms of following the letter of the law, there was this lawsuit in 2013.
Yeah, and who was general counsel? Agreed. Who was general counsel at TLC at that time? Mirazoshi. You see what I mean about the same names just coming up over and over again?
But I guess my point is, it's like, when cases go to the Supreme Court, it's not about, it's like the role of the judges is to assess whether the letter of the law is being followed, rather than opine about what is right or wrong, because that's for the legislative branch of the government. And so, in 2013, there was a class action settlement, and whether you agree or disagree, there was a settlement. And they said, okay, 50% of all yellow cabs have to be accessible. Now they extended that from 2020 because of the COVID pandemic. And now based on the latest, there's an ongoing case, they're saying, well, the city thinks we added more weight. It's like, okay, that could be true, but that you just can't decide for yourself that the settlement is no longer applicable to you. Like, that's not how the world works.
Right.
Like, this is a country of laws. There's rules, there's laws, and you just can't choose what you're going to follow and what you're not going to follow, because that diminishes.
Hello?
Yep.
Abe?
I'm still here.
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, okay.
I'm here.
I didn't hear anything for a minute.
Well, I had myself on mute. Okay.
We'll have to read the city's motion in this lawsuit.
I want to say something. I want to say something, and I forgot what it was now.
About the wheelchair accessibility?
Yeah. What they didn't anticipate was when they made the deal for half the taxis to be wheelchair accessible, all the medallions were on the road. Okay.
Yeah.
And now there's 4,000 medallions off the road. Okay. For a while there was more. Okay. And so if there's 4,000 medallions off the road, that's going to affect the number that they anticipated.
No, they took that into account. 42% of active medallions are wheelchair accessible. So it's pretty close to 50. And from what I understand in the mayor's management report, or one of those reports I read, is that most of the demand, within 15 minutes, either a wheelchair accessible Uber or black car or taxi comes up to your door and picks you up. So, I don't really see that there's that much of a problem. But you're right, it's not within the letter of the law of the settlement, which the TLC did not have to agree to 10 years ago, because the Americans with Disabilities Act said that airlines and taxis were exempt. And I remember let me just get this in. I remember the judge that's true, but there's no reason why a city or a city agency can't go further than the law is requiring, and that's what Mirazoshi and the TLC did. And that's why nobody wanted to buy Nissans, and we lost a lot of business. And even people I know who are in wheelchairs tell me that they don't like the Nissans because they said it's noisy and it's bumpy, and I don't like it. So, and there's no demand.
Yeah, I think that topic you're discussing, I think I would separate that topic on what should the mandate be, to separately then the TLC made a settlement, and they need to, and then that settlement was extended, by the way, from 2020 to 2023. And so what I'm saying is that this is getting so hostile in the city. So for example, the TLC, let's recap. January, they try to make a CPI adjustment to the wage inflation. Uber and Lyft sued them, if you remember, back in, I think, early 2023. They lost that lawsuit, right? They released, then they did this SHL pilot. The TWA, they, number one, didn't hold really a public discussion about, in terms of the release of, or the reissuance, however you want to phrase it. Then you had this very public, you have like David Doe on one, we have this on YouTube, David Doe standing and, by Ravi Desai here, and they're like going like face to face, right? Then you have the release of these cars, and you have, the Revel founder in the actual, like City Hall announcement, right? And it's kind of like, and then you have a lawsuit with the TWA. Then you have the IDG, like all. What I'm saying is that this is a crazy paradigm we're operating in, where no one can talk to one another, and everybody's trying to, it's zero sum for everybody. I win, you lose. You lose, I win, right? And when politics get zero sum, right, then other people are going to act in a zero sum manner. And so getting back to like, okay, now we're at this point where 10,000 EVs have been, new EVs, near 10,000 new EVs have been added. By the way, when I say 10,000, everybody has to remember there's 1,000 in March and April, right? Plus the 9,700 applications in October, so it's actually more than 10,000 in reality if you just go over the whole year. What we're saying is that you're making all the logical arguments. He came on this podcast, we're asking him, he's making generic answers, all of this stuff. He's defaming people's businesses by calling them predatory. By the way, to call someone a predator, that's a very big thing. And now if they're predatory, then before making that accusation, lay off the math. You just can't say they're charging $500 a week, they're predatory. Are you just like, on what basis is that predatory? And then you also have to understand that there's a lot of TLC drivers out there. They live, let's not like sugarcoat it, they live a very tough life. A lot of taxi drivers, TLC drivers, they want breaks, they want, different stuff. They have, there's like a meme there's this meme going around that like the political viewpoints of many like Uber drivers, right? If, they can lend themselves to extreme opinions, and I respect the work they do, but just because someone is complaining doesn't mean like you have to ignore the person.
No, they always find some way to buy them off with crumbs. Whether it's a 3.5% raise, or, well, we're going to look into, the lockouts, and there should be some process. And they always find some little crumbs to throw at the victims. And I should note that one of the last things Doug Shifter ever said was, I'm not a slave, and I refuse to be one. But the way things are going in this world, and it's not just for hire vehicle drivers, it's, going to be everybody. Just, be minimum wage slaves, just working away, nose to the grindstone, just in exchange for, not starving to death. I mean, that's basically where we are, as opposed to, let's go back 10, 12 years, if you were an individual yellow taxi medallion owner driving your own cab, you had $700 days. And I'm talking about, right, Abe, 10, 12 years ago. That's not what you have now, nor you will ever have again by any of these drivers, whatever class they're working for. That's not how it works.
A lot of working class New Yorkers put their kids through college, made a life for themselves. All of the Abe. I mean, it would be interesting. Like you drove it for all those years. That basically you had a medallion. You're going to retirement. You did your 40 years. You had the medallion. You're going to depend on that. And to go back on all of this, I mean, the thing is, like, my anger and frustration can only be so much. I can't even imagine, like, for people who actually put in those years, I mean, my anger would be, my frustration, my anger, all these emotions would be over the roof.
Let me
to tell you that, oh, don't worry, you can put the Uber app in your taxi and you could make minimum wage now too. That's like the big prize. That's how low the bar is now.
Let me say this. There's a lot of people that I don't know how they survived the crash when their $1 million medallions suddenly were worth next to nothing. Okay? Or the small amount they still owe to the credit unions. Okay? All right? As far as I'm concerned, I had to find another way. Okay? All right? I could not believe what had happened when it did happen. Okay? I was counting on that money for retirement. Okay? I'm still getting some Social Security, which in today's economy isn't enough to live on. Okay? But I don't know what, I found a way. I had money saved. Okay? And that saved money, I bought annuities, which are guaranteed incomes. Okay? So that keeps you from spending all that money. Okay? Because you've already tied it up until you die. Okay?
Well,
with a guarantee that you will get money every month. Okay? Go ahead.
What I was saying, not to interrupt you, Abe, but I think what I think you're saying, and we had mentioned this in another podcast, where no one's ever going to get 100% their way, and everybody obviously has to offer it. Like, that's life. You if you have kids, you probably teach them, like, sometimes you're not going to get your way, and that's life, and life's going to be quote unquote unfair, and that's the nature of the things, right? I think when the TLC makes policies and all of this, and the yellow cab industry, and this is obviously predating me, even my birth, right? It's given a lot to the city. It's a global icon. Like it's literally how many Hollywood movies that have the yellow cab, and it's an icon of this industry, and it's actually helped the city raise money and stuff like that. I've never owned a taxi medallion. And so my point is that there has to be empathy and balance, and this is what politicians this is what politicians have to balance in New York, because New York is this crazy place where you have these literally billionaires, and you have people who are below the poverty line, and you have to make this. And people have throughout the years have been ups and downs in the city, right? The 70s and all of that stuff. You have to balance these things. And I think what happened with how I view it, now Abe and Carolyn, you're going to have a much deeper view of this, is that what happened to the yellow cab industry, it's unbalanced. That's the issue. It's unbalanced. Okay, Uber was this new technology. It came in, everything. I'm not saying you have to kill Uber or anything like that. I think, where was the balance? And when there's not balance in the industry, do you have winners and losers? And what you're talking about, Carolyn, in terms of how politics is feeling these days, right? We have a presidential election coming up, like no one likes either candidate. It's like this is crazy. And so we're getting into this place in the country and the city where it's like it's very tribal. It's like you're on this side, you're on that side. There's the line in the sand, Alamo style politics. And what we need is politicians who say, how hard is it for David Doe or Mira Joshi to just make a statement saying, we think the yellow cab industry is important. We are going to control the supply, just say basic logical things.
Right, but they've never said that. Not in the 10 years I've been involved in this. Never have they said that.
All they had to do was enforce the rules that were already in the books.
Exactly.
And let us keep what later on was created, the exclusionary zone, where only the yellows can pick up, okay, which is 96th Street on the east side and 110th Street on the west side down to the Battery, Okay, all right. If they only enforced that, there wouldn't have been any problem. Okay. Okay. I mean, when they put the green cars on the road, cars on the road, they were not allowed to do pickups in that area. Okay. So why should anybody else that comes along be able to do that? Okay. They made this ridiculous argument that they were prearranged calls. The Ubers. You stand on the corner of 34th and 7th Avenue, and you tap your cell phone, smartphone, I should say, and suddenly somebody pulls up within 30 seconds to pick you up. That's not a prearranged call.
I think how I view it is there's a bit of nuance to this. What I think is that debate, right? The debate has to occur before the policy is made. That's the main issue. You can't say, well, we'll let that keep on going on. We'll let them keep on adding cars and we'll see after the fact if indeed what they said. It's like crazy. Like that's, I think, what even with this lawsuit is about. Is like, okay, we've reinstated the EV exemption and it's like, okay, then in February you're going to make a report, but how do you know that the market didn't get oversaturated because it's an unlimited addition of cars? So you could find out after the fact, and it's just like repeating the previous history. And the thing
and they're still doing it. They're doing it with the deliveristas. Did they have a debate and make policies about how many deliveristas we need, or is 65,000 deliveristas? That's a good number. 75,000, 100,000. Did they make any rules? Or a means to enforce existing rules on how to regulate these guys? No, they just let it rip, and that's what they do with everything.
Well, and so then I think that's why this is why I think let's be clear, like Mayor Adams, Deputy Mayor Joshi, TLC David. The thing is that we're not; these people aren't idiots. They're intelligent people. No one's saying they're idiots.
They're just following orders.
But what I'm saying is that those orders, if they don't represent the people, right? People are either going to walk away, meaning just move out of the city. That's one outcome, and maybe they want that, right? Or two, the underlying anger in the city is going to get to a boiling point. And this has happened throughout politics, throughout the centuries. If you push people to boiling points, you get boiling point reactions. And so, for example, let's just use this yellow cab example. I have written that if they keep the EV exemption, that it's going to collapse the medallion market, right? When I wrote that in October, I was very closely tracking the medallion market. Medallions are selling 110 to 130, right? Around that, depending on whether it's a wave or et cetera. I still keep very close track of the medallion market. I spoke to a broker the other day. A wave is selling at 85,000. A wave.
I saw that. I saw a listing for that. Yeah.
Exactly, and I actually called. You probably saw the same listing. I actually called them to confirm it, right? And so my thing is that this is observable. One thing is for me to say that, but 110. Now it's to 85, or it was 105, now it's to 85, right? And that's in a period of 3 or 4 months, right? And so it's this is less opinion and more like observable market dynamics. And so this decision that's coming up as it relates to the FHE license review, I think is super important. And by the way, I do agree with what you said earlier, Carolyn. I think unfortunately, or fortunately, however you're going to put it, I think the best friend for the TLC industry right now is city council. Now, yes, I know there's a lot of characters in city council that aren't the greatest, but the city council increasingly seems like they're being a check. The best way to view the city council, how I always viewed it, is like the president versus the Congress kind of thing. And there are members in the city council now that, for example, Amanda Farias and Selvena Brooks Powers, who are the majority, they're influential, they're leadership positions, and they also sit on the transportation committee. They actually wrote a letter saying, why did you add so much cars? You didn't run this by city council. Right now, we might not agree with them on 10
but what
other
did they
things.
do about it? Nothing. They didn't do anything about it. They could have created some new legislation or called David Doe down there and said, what the hell are you doing? What are you thinking? This isn't what we intended for you to do. But they didn't do that, did they? Well, you know what? It'll be interesting to see what happens on March 14th at the budget hearings to see. But I predict that nobody's going to challenge anything. Or they might just do it a little bit for lip service to say, well, I asked some questions, but then they're not really going to go after them.
Well, I think this is where the importance of media comes in, as a fourth estate, right? Where if they're not going to ask those, why have they been elected? New Yorkers have elected them.
Wait, and how were these people elected? Many of them are women, and women are untouchable. You can't criticize them. If you criticize them on any level, you're going to be accused of misogyny and sexism. Okay, many of them came out of 21 and 21, which was a group that was created to get more women into power. Bradley Tusk, who was Uber's, number one promoter, this is going back, 8-10 years ago, was at the heart of that and funding it. That's where these women come from. They come out of that. And then once they're in office, they get coached, how to get staff and what policies to promote and how to write legislation and what legislation should we write. I mean, this is all prearranged. They're not thinking this stuff up by themselves. You can just tell by how they act. So I don't really hold that much hope.
This is my view of it. I'm a believer, and all of us are believers. I'm not to say no one else believes in this. If they are legitimately elected, they have a mandate to make laws and make legislation. I think the way I would frame it to them is, respectfully, I would frame it to them that, listen, if you're not going to listen to your constituents, right, who 70% are saying there are too many cars. By the way, what we're saying is not just a yellow cab perspective. This is also coming now from the Uber and Lyft industry.
Who
right?
are going to have to pay congestion fees, and they go to these hearings at MTA, and just average everyday people say things like, but I think the cause of congestion is too many, for-hire vehicles on the road, and I don't want to have to pay congestion fees because there's too many for-hire vehicles on the road. And, it's in the transcripts, and then nobody pays any attention to them. It's,
well,
the way
when you say, I'm a little, maybe because I'm naive, and maybe because my brain is kind of wired this way, I don't like accepting the way things work.
No, I don't like accepting it either. But when I look at the money trail and I see who got what money from whom, it's pretty clear, what's happening.
But how do you view that? Someone is going to get money, right, Carolyn? Whoever's in there, someone's going to get money from somewhere. But that doesn't mean just because. But it has to be balanced. Just because if I donated $100,000 or whatever the limit is, right, to X politician. By the way, I've never donated any money to any politician. But if I've donated X money to a politician, I can't then expect them to be like, I called them and be like, you do what I say. But it gets you access. Crazy.
No, and everybody is on the same page. I had a discussion in the street with my city council person, who happens to be Keith Powers, and what were we talking about? Oh, we were talking about the EVs and unlimited numbers of EVs. And I said to him, and of course we won't even get into the question of whether that's even a worthy goal to be pursuing. And he looked really confused at that point, because everybody in his milieu is on the exact same page on that. That's the given. EV's good, internal combustion bad, hybrid not good, EV better. I mean, it's just accepted, and everybody in the think tanks that you consult with, and the consulting groups, and the lobbyists, and the electeds, and the appointed, everybody's on the same page. There is no debate. Was there ever any debate about requiring FHVs to be electric vehicles? No, I don't recall any debate on that. They just did it. That's all. And then they never think about long-term consequences of any of this stuff.
To your point, many politicians these days are framing things in very binary terms. It's like zeroism. That's what many people have called it. It's this concept of zeroism. It's either like, it's like all or nothing. It's either one way or you're with us or you're against us, right?
Well, yeah, it is, because when you're a Democrat and you see Secretary of Transportation, she's not Transportation, what the hell is she? Secretary of Energy, Jennifer Granholm, comes up to New York City to do the opening of the Revel base, and she's saying, my heart is full. I mean, you get the message, if you're a Democrat, working within that machine, you're going to toe the line. And, they don't even have to tell you what to do. You just know what to do. But the thing is, if there's a regime change in Washington, are there going to be big subsidies for EVs and charging and all that? Is that going to continue?
I think it's what I viewed is that this is my kind of way I view it. You can be for zero emission, fossil fuels will eventually run out, all of that stuff. But at the same time, this is not an on-off switch over here. And then it's a much more, like Taxi Dave was saying, and other people have been saying, it's like, okay, if you're charging a car, but it's coming from natural gas, explain to me how is that zero emission, right? Or like how you're solving for it. I think the framing of extremely complex issues in these very binary ways with binary policies is irresponsible. It's anti-American, in my opinion. America is a complex place. New York City is a extremely complex place within an already complex country. And this is the importance of having people with nuanced perspectives, right? Like as it relates to the electrification, right? Okay, why do we have to, like, for example, if you spoke to Keith Powers, it's like, let's say you were pro-electrification. Why shouldn't we prioritize the existing fleet to electrify? Why do we have to add new cars? That's another topic that can be discussed. It's like, okay, let's say I'm 100% for electrification. Why do we have to add new cars? And also, by the way, for better or worse, the people who built this country or city, I mean, I know people have different perspectives. The buildings that stand in Midtown, these were robber barons. These were industrial titans. This is who built this country, who built the city with the working class who helped them. And then those monopolies were broken. There's all this history behind it, right? I saw a recent New York City thing on electrification, like a short video clip. I don't know if you saw it. Like, back in 1895, the first taxis were electric kind of thing, right? At the end of the video, they're like, until this guy came up, and it's like, are we like talking about Henry Ford? Like that's who you want to go at? Like with this, that you want to blame Henry Ford why taxis weren't electrified?
That most of the car companies are, kind of backing out of the EV transition, at least temporarily. Because I think they sense that there might be some big changes in January of 2025. And they might not be getting the subsidies that they thought they were going to get. I don't know.
I think it's on. I know that topic quite well. Where I think the demand is not there. So, for example, the perfect example of promoting less emissions is hybrids. Like right now, the demand for hybrid vehicles is skyrocketing, but no one wants to talk. Why can't New York make a green rides initiative where they aim for 100% of the fleet to be hybrid? Why wouldn't that be achieved?
They wanted that back in 2007, 2008, and we gave it to them, not 100%, but I guess they just weren't happy with that all. And I'm ringing the bell here because we're on the 1 hour and 17-minute mark.
Okay. I think you had enough.
Most of our listeners have already left.
Right.
Okay. So we'll pick this up another time. You guys can keep going and going and going and going, and I don't blame you. Okay.
Well, let's see what happens on March 14th at the City Council hearing. Probably nothing. But I think I'll watch.
Okay, and when is the court decision?
Well, they have to wait for the FHV license. The FHV license review has to be published first, which will be published in March, but it's unclear if there's a exact due date on it, but hopefully that'll be published in March. But last year they published it in October.
So we'll keep track of that, and we'll get back to do another show.
Oh yeah, there's one more. There's one more here. TLC is having a meeting on March 6th at 10 o'clock. They don't say why.
Oh.
I assume they're going to be voting on the taxi improvement fund because they had a hearing in November about it. They wanted to change the amount of money that they were going to give to the owner-drivers or owners from $14,000 initially to $20,000 initially, and change the yearly payment to $1,000 instead of $4,000. But, who knows what they'll come up with on March 6th. I'm assuming that that's what they're going to do. They're going to vote on that, but I don't really know.
We'll keep track of these meetings. And, I always post the meetings on NYC Taxi News. I want to thank everybody for listening. Thank you, Dawood, for participating, along with you, Carolyn. Okay?
Thanks all, guys.
Thank you, Abe, for having us.
Okay, and thanks, everybody, for tuning in to the NYC Taxi News podcast.
Okay. Bye, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Bye, guys.